Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. And today we are reviewing Elantris, the final Cosmere book that I have never read by Brandon Sanderson. So what I'm going to do is give you a very quick overview of what the Cosmere is, in case you don't know. I'm going to talk about the setup for Elantris without going into any spoilers, and there will be no spoilers throughout this review. I'll then chat a little bit about my favourite characters and the kind of things that I liked and didn't like about the book, and then at the end I'll give you a little bit of a rating. So let's dive straight into things and talk about the Cosmere. So, what's the Cosmere? The Cosmere is a shared universe. Think like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But this is told exclusively in prose novels by an author called Brandon Sanderson. So Sanderson is, and I mean, everybody will probably know all of this stuff already, so maybe I should have skipped it, but let's carry on. Sanderson is probably the maybe most successful fantasy author in the world right now, and is definitely one of the most popular. I think that in terms of significance to the genre, I would imagine he will be looked back upon quite fondly in terms of how many readers that he has brought to the genre. I mean, I know that I personally got back into reading again after maybe around a decade's worth of reading 1 to 2 books a year by reading Brandon Sanderson books, by specifically his Mistborn series, which is where most people get into Sanderson. However, the Mistborn books were not actually Sanderson's first book. So Sanderson's first ever published work was this book, Elantris. Now, Elantris is basically about a world that is kind of on the brink of, I say a world, it's about a country, and more specifically 2 twin cities where one of them is kind of on the brink. So about 10 years ago, there was an event, and the earth shook. The magical people of the land, the Elantrians, who lived in a massive walled city called Elantris, they basically were randomly selected from the people. You would wake up one morning and be an Elantrian, and Elantrians have access to what are called aeons. Aeons are basically a kind of writing where you can write spells in the air with your hands. So the Elantrians would wake up and they would be like, right, I've got access to this incredible power source. I've got the ability to draw these aeons and use Elantrian magic. And then they would move to Elantris to be with other Elantrians in this kind of perfect superhuman society. Elantrians for me felt a little bit like Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen, in that Sanderson had gone like, okay, so how does a society that grows up around this mystical city evolve? So, for example, this is not a scarcity-based economy. So Elantrians can create food from nothing, so there's no need for a serf or peasant class. Basically, everybody is middle or upper class, and very, very few people are upper class, and most of them make their money by selling Elantrian-made items or things that are to do with Elantris to other countries, so trading. So when the big cataclysm happens and the earth shakes and the Elantrians all start to become sick and lose their power, and even the city kind of becomes sick, the civilization that has kind of grown up around Elantris has to completely change. They need to become farmers. They need a peasant class that they didn't have before. And the merchants, who were the richest people with the most resources in the Elantrian society, and the ones that have kind of gathered and hoarded resources in a way that the rest of the citizenry have not, because of the post-scarcity economy that they have, the merchants kind of rise up and take over the country. and they basically change the entire governmental system. They outlaw the Elantrians, who are all kind of withering away and dying without their access to this magic. And anyone who goes through the Sheod, which is a process of turning into an Elantrian, which is completely random, so you can be chosen at any age, any person can be chosen, anyone who lives in the country, basically. And they are then, when they wake up, and they're like, oh crap, I'm an Elantrian, you know, their skin goes grey, it starts to get black splotches. Elantrians are all kind of put into the decaying city to die. Unfortunately, Elantrians cannot die, and they also are unable to do quite a few things that normal people can do. So the society in Elantris is kind of this... it's almost like a post-apocalypse, like dog eat dog, people are out for themselves sort of society. Really, really interesting setup in that we have these kind of two different versions of like a horrible way to live. So you have this capitalist society on the outside, and then on the inside you have this basically gang-based dystopian, what's the term? Like dictatorship, basically. There's like 3 gangs that own 3 parts of Elantris, and if you stray into one of their zones, then basically they take all your shit. Really, really interesting setup, and the contrast between the two, because we have a character who is new to both areas as POV characters. The contrast between the two is really marked and really interesting. And I think that the kind of capitalist society that's set up on the outside, where basically the richest people become the kings and the lords and ladies. So the guy who takes over the government is a man called Iodon, and he takes over and becomes king because he's the richest merchant. That's literally it. And the other lords and ladies are basically a rank table of other richest people. So you can even get to the point as well, and there's one character who's kind of on the bubble for this, where you make a few bad investments and your income drops, and the king ejects you from being a lord, and you have to become like a middle-class person or a merchant or even a peasant if you lose enough money. So the whole way that Sanderson has set up this world, I think, is genuinely really interesting. Character-wise, we have got 3 major POV characters. So we've got Raoden, who is kind of joint protagonist with Serene. Now, Raoden is the crown prince of the city outside of Elantris, of the country, which is called Erelon. He's the king's firstborn son, and Raoden is a bit of an activist. He is against his father's kind of method of ruling. He wants to essentially introduce a fairer and better way for their society to function, which is kind of socialism. And then you have Serene, who is betrothed to be married to Raoden, and she is the princess of another country, which we aren't really clear on how this particular country is run. However, it seems to be governed a bit more nicely, if that makes sense. And overall, Serene comes into the Erelon kind of court and the royal family, and is very much like, I'm not down with what's going on here, and we need to overthrow this king. And then we have a final POV character called Hrathen, and Hrathen is a priest, a very high-ranking priest for a religion which I actually can't remember the name of the religion now. I literally finished this book yesterday morning, or maybe the day before, actually. So he's the high priest for this religion, and he's called what's called a Gyorn, and he has basically just come from, and this religion is basically tied to the kind of empire of another country on the world that Elantris resides on, which I want to say is called like Cell or something, like SEL, Cell. I could be wrong. So he's been sent from this empire to basically convert Erelon to their religion. And the Derethi, that's what the religion is called, the Derethi religion. And he has just come from another country where he did that, and he did convert the entire country, but he did it by forcing a violent revolution where the peasantry rose up against the rulers, and the country's basically been on fire ever since. And while, yes, the Derethi have kind of moved in and taken it over, there's not very much left. And he is determined to bring Erelon into the Derethi Empire in the same way that he has done before, but to do it in a more humane way. And his idea is to use manipulation and politicking and religious rhetoric to convert the country. And the inciting incident of the entire book is that at the very beginning of the book, Raoden, the Crown Prince, wakes up as an Elantrian and is thrown into Elantris. And so he has to discover the Elantrian society and to kind of make his way in that and to introduce his politics and his way of, thinking and way of wanting to do things into the Elantrian society. But he also has to contend with these violent gangs. He's also kind of obsessed with unlocking the magic of Elantris and curing everyone and finding out why the city is going through this kind of prolonged rotting sickness. So his is a really fantastic storyline. I really enjoyed the political aspects of it. The political aspects of the entire book are really interesting. And then we also have the mystery aspect of what's going on with Elantris and why it's dying and all this sort of stuff. And then moving over from that, you have Serene, who's coming from this foreign court, and she has a couple of storylines really. So she's trying to kind of pick up the pieces of Raoden's proposed revolution, as the princess of this, the new princess of this society. She's trying to pick up the pieces of his revolution, but also she is really struggling with kind of wanting to be loved. So she has a very loving father, loving family, but back home she knows that she's not loved, she's not thought of fondly, she's respected, she's feared, but she's not. No one is in love with her, and she thought she was falling in love with Raoden during their betrothal, but then when she turns up and he's supposedly dead, as they cover up that he's made an Elantrian, so he's supposedly dead, and she then has to kind of pick up the pieces of her self-esteem, her life, and also his revolution. Hers, again, is a really interesting POV. And then Hrathen, as I said, is trying to convert the country, but he's also having to deal with religious zealots who are in his monastery. So there are some aspects or some elements of the Derethi faith which are a lot more militaristic, a lot more cult-like. They deal in, human sacrifice and all this sort of stuff. And several of those people are in Hrathen's monastery. So we have this really, really interesting kind of conflict within Hrathen between his logic and his faith in the true teachings of his religion, and then the kind of twisted belief in the Empire's teachings of his religion from the zealots that are underneath him. And Hrathen is kind of in conflict with not just the Erelonian society, but also with elements of his own church that don't think he's faithful enough, or that are, overzealous or prejudiced, and lots of really interesting storylines there. I think overall, I genuinely really love the book. So a lot of people have said that this is Sanderson's weakest book. And I wonder if that is because this book is very much concerned with the kind of politics of it all, which, while some of his books have some political elements, he's not a very politics-heavy writer. And then if they're also concerned with kind of the philosophy of religion and whether, different aspects of religions and all this sort of stuff, which I thought was genuinely really fascinating. It feels like Sanderson is kind of working out his own point of view as he's writing this book. This was his first book, as I said, and many people decry it as his worst. I personally much preferred this to several of his other books. I don't know why. So I'd put off reading this because I'd been told that it wasn't great. That it was like, at best, a 3-star read and you kind of suffered through it. But I would just completely disagree with that. I was really struggling between whether I should give this a 4 or a 5-star. I think I ended on a 4, but the mystery was satisfying, and you were given enough clues to kind of be able to work it out yourself, which I thought was really well done. I've really enjoyed the relationships between the protagonists. So all 3 protagonists kind of have differing relationships to each other, which I really liked. I thought the supporting cast was good, and the stakes were high, and a lot of really interesting stuff went down in this story. I mean, it's hard to talk about without spoiling it, but genuinely I thought the story was really well done. I thought the dialogue was good, the prose was good, no real issues in terms of the quality of the writing there at all. For his first published work, it was very polished. I think the version that I'm reading is like the 10th anniversary author's preferred edition or whatever, but that's the version that's available now, so if you want to read that, it's out there. I also listened to the audiobook for some of this one, because I think it was on the Audible catalogue, or I already owned it or something, but I was listening to a lot of the audiobook. And the audiobook is not by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. I think adding Kate Redding could have improved it, but the new narrator, I think Stephen Garrett was the name of the narrator, I could be wrong, but the new narrator, the old narrator previous to Michael Kramer, did a fantastic job, and I think he's better overall than Kramer at the narration in this particular book. So if you are the kind of person who is absolutely in love with Kramer and Redding, then you may want to just eyeball read this one. Although personally, I do think that this is an improvement over Michael Kramer, if not Kate Redding. I do think that it would have been nice to have had a woman voice Sereni's point of view chapters. However, it's not essential. I think the narrator did a good enough job with her voice and her personality. So yeah, would recommend the audiobook, to be honest. So I think that, like I was saying, this is a really interesting book in many ways, because it feels like maybe the most political of Sanderson's books. It feels like kind of a rallying call against capitalism, and it shows you kind of the benefits of socialism, which I thought was genuinely really interesting. Something I kind of wasn't expecting from Sanderson, and I can see why a lot of my friends who are quite political say this is one of their favourite Sanderson books, because it is for me. I have not reread any of the Cosmere, so we're talking about this. This could be recency effect, recency bias, but for me, I really, really enjoyed this, and I felt like it properly nailed every element I was looking for from this book. So it had a fantastic political storyline. It had the conflicts of kind of like politics versus religion, and then it had like a really interesting magic system that Sanderson did not spend pages and pages and pages and pages telling you how it worked. he just kind of slowly and subtly weaved it in throughout the book. And while it is a hard magic system, it feels like a soft magic system because of the way that you learn it, if that makes sense. Like, I'm sure that there are Cosmere scholars who can be like, oh, this Aeon means this, and if you change that, it does this. And it's very structured, but I don't think it has the, like, thing that I really disliked about some of Sanderson's hard magic systems is when he's like, well, X equals Y, or like, so he has in the book The Sunlit Man, he talks about BEUs, breath equivalent units, and he's literally putting like numbers and data on magic, and it's kind of just turning it into a sci-fi thing. And one of the things that I liked about Elantris was that it had a more advanced society due to these Elantrians being around. So they had like almost like AI assistant drones called Scions. And like the richest people in the society have these Scions that float around that they can use to communicate instantaneously over vast distances. And the Scions are like mini computers, which was really interesting. And I think that that's kind of like the seed for Sanderson going like, I'm not just going to do elves and dwarves and magic spells. I'm going to do something a bit different. And I'd be really interested to see where we go with Elantris 2 and 3, which he has announced, and he will be writing towards the end of the decade. So, yeah, if you, like me, are interested in political stories that feel like they have something to say, and you're looking for interesting characters that kind of interact really well with the world, and I thought the ending was good as well. I mean, people are saying the ending's rushed, but I think it's just that they're used to the Sanderson, like 30% of the book is ending sort of thing, and the ending doesn't snowball in the way that a lot of his books do. It is a lot closer to the end of the book, if that makes sense. There are a few inciting incidents around the 60-70% mark that feel a bit like the start of the Sanderlanche, but really things only kick off in the last 100 or so pages. And when they do kick off, I thought it was really well done. And it let you see that kind of explosion of magic. It let you see the magic system used to its fullest. So something that I was really happy and really kind of fist pumping to read. So yeah, this one was a great book that I really enjoyed. And again, like I said, I struggled to choose between 4 and 5 star for this one. So if you are cautious and you're saying, oh, I don't know if I want to read Elantris because people say it's Sanderson's worst book, then if what I'm telling you about sounds good, give it a read. I would definitely recommend it. And if you have liked watching this video, then I would suggest you give it a like. And if you've read Elantris and you'd like to chat with me about it in the comments, if you have the complete opposite opinion to me and you think it's rubbish, then absolutely do say so and let's have a chat down there. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Join our little community and let's talk about some great fantasy and science fiction books. Goodbye. See you tomorrow.